When talking about slasher films, there's no shortage of classics to bring up. However, one that is often overlooked is 1981's Graduation Day. It started in the mind of ex-rabbi turned film director Herb Fried. Fried was a rabbi for 3 years and was married to a Broadway actress. She could tell his heart wasn't into being a rabbi, so she convinced him to focus on his true passion, film. The first film he directed was AWOL in 1972. After that, he did the horror film Haunts in 1977. While working on Haunts, he met film executive David Bond. Bond had spent 15 years in film distribution, working for everyone from MGM to Russ Meyer's RM Films. He was even in charge of the distribution for the John Carpenter classic, Halloween. Bond saw the demand not only for movies, but specifically horror movies. More and more theaters were popping up, and they all wanted new content. Bond spoke to Fried, and they agreed the real money was in making and distributing their own films. So they joined together in a partnership to do just that. Fried wanted to make art house films, but agreed there was no money to be made in that. The one genre that almost always turns a profit is horror, so they knew what their first film would be. They wrote a story about an architect whose wife is possessed by a 100-year-old ghost. While working on the script, one night Bond told Fried, "You know, this isn't just evil, this is beyond evil." So right then they knew they had their title for the film. Around the time Beyond Evil was released, a little film called Friday the 13th took theaters by storm. After Halloween and Friday the 13th, Bond could see this new trend forming, and wanted to jump on it before it was too late. Since both Halloween and Friday the 13th revolved around a specific date, they began to look to see what was available that wasn't already used or in production. Valentine's Day? Nope. Christmas? Nope. New Year's Eve? Nope. Mother's Day? Nope. Finally, they landed on Graduation Day. It was the only holiday-type theme that hadn't already been taken. Now with the title, they worked the story around it. They decided it would be about a high school track star that dies during a race. Shortly after that, the day before Graduation Day, someone starts killing members of the track team. Fried and his wife mostly worked on the script. They weren't entirely familiar with horror films and wanted to see if there was a pattern to them. They started watching horror films at the drive-in and brought along a stopwatch to time the breaks in between kills. This gave them the idea for the stopwatch in the film. The track star died in 30 seconds, so the killer would start the watch and kill the victim within 30 seconds. With the script written, they needed the production budget for the film. They wanted to be able to make the film with no investors, so they would own it 100%. They came up with a very unique way of getting the budget. The duo traveled around the US, going to different theaters and talking them into putting money into the film in exchange for advance guarantees. They would put up the money and the theaters would recoup their investment by playing the movie. This worked out well for Fried and Bond. On top of getting their budget, they had numerous theaters locked into playing the movie once it was done. After all was said and done, they had about $300,000 for the movie. Now with the budget, they started casting. They worked with Linda Day George in Beyond Evil and were familiar with her husband Christopher, so they hired him for the part of Coach Michaels. For the character of Anne, they hired Patch McKenzie. Originally they had another actress for the part, but shortly before filming, she demanded 50% more money, thinking they'd have to give it to her since they wouldn't have enough time to find a replacement. They fired her and hired Patch. Character actor Michael Pataki was hired to play the principal. They need to have some professional athletes for the film, so they hired Denise Cheshire to play Sally. She was an Olympic-trained gymnastics champion who was just getting into acting. They also hired Tom Hintnaus to play Pete. He was a professional pole vaulter that was going to the Olympics in 1980. That is, until the US boycotted them since they were being held in Moscow. While casting, they kept getting calls from the agency representing Christopher George. The agent was begging them to hire this young, unknown actress to play anything in the film. That actress was 20-year-old Vanna White. Turns out George was her uncle and was trying to get her a break in the industry. Graduation Day ended up being her first theatrical film. She did shoot Gypsy Angels in 1980, but due to it not being completed, it wasn't released until 1989 when it went direct to video. While location scouting, they were able to get 2 houses in Pasadena, California. The main location in the film was La Cañada High School. They spoke to the principal and sent him a copy of the script. He was fine with it and let them shoot there for $2,000 a week, which is insanely cheap for this large of a location. With everything lined up, they started filming in September of 1980. School was in session, so many of the background students were the real students of La Cañada. For some scenes, they hired the kids as extras, who didn't care about being paid, they were just excited to be in the movie. In some cases, like the roller disco, they paid the kids $5 each to skate around the actors. They took full advantage of the location at La Cañada and shot everywhere over the campus. The field, the locker rooms, even the woods just outside the school. While looking for music for the film, they were approached by a band called Felony. They offered to do the music in the film for free in exchange to being able to keep the song rights. They agreed, and Felony did 3 songs for the film: Lucky Strike, The Killer, and Gangster Rock. The band even appeared in the film, playing gangster rock in the extended roller disco scene. They were working on a tight schedule and were trying to save money where they could. They had a strict 3-take rule for the shots, so they weren't wasting reels of film. After filming for about a week, they ran into a major problem. The actress playing Dolores. According to Bond, she was causing nothing but trouble on set. She was being very difficult to work with and was alienating people. They fired her and brought in Linnea Quigley as her replacement. The problem was they already shot a bunch of scenes with the original actress, including her death reveal. They couldn't afford to reshoot, so they just inserted Quigley and hoped no one noticed. This did confuse some people because Quigley does have a very distinct look, and on the team photo was the original actress. Once Quigley was on board, the shoot went much smoother. They shot some inserts with Linnea alone to establish her earlier in the film because many of the group shots were with the other actress. Wanting the movie to be more mystery than slasher, they filled it with red herrings. Was it Anne, the grieving military-trained sister? Was it the angry coach? Was it the eccentric principal? They did things to throw the audience off, like showing the killer cross the victims off the list with lipstick to make you think it was Anne. They also had her disappear for part of the film while the killings were going on. Not to mention how the killing started the moment she showed up. The director originally wanted to put everything into making it seem like Anne was the killer, but the actress was able to convince him it would be better if they left it more ambiguous. If they made it too obvious, the audience would know she wasn't the killer. The casting director, Aaron Butler, has a cameo as the photographer. Later in the film, the director has a cameo as the killer. Having Anne find Laura was the director's homage to Psycho. Filming ran through September and into October. After that, they spent about 3 months in post. Martin J. Sadoff was hired to be the editor for the film. Fried wanted the movie to be more energetic, so Sadoff cut the film to the music. He also did these split-second edits for certain scenes, which really made them stand out. The gangster rock sequence was especially memorable due to the edits. While the film was set to be distributed to theaters that invested in the production, Fried and Bond looked into the possibility of getting wide distribution. MGM was interested and had a meeting with Bond. One of the execs said, "I could tell this movie's low budget. What did it cost, $3 million?" Bond just laughed and said, "Yeah, close to that." Ultimately, they decided to stick to the original plan and release the film regionally. They had about 200 or 300 prints made that they could move around the country. They set it up to open in Los Angeles on May 1st, 1981, just in time for high school graduation. They even played it up with a clever marketing campaign. The class of 1981 is running out of time. For the opening, they hired some local teens to dress up in their cap and gowns to hand out "I Survived Graduation Day" buttons at the Los Angeles premiere. The film had a huge opening in Los Angeles and played for 8 weeks. They then took their prints and moved it to different regions around the country, where it did well, but nowhere near as well as it did in LA. Part of this was due to the movie critic slasher backlash at the time. Many newspaper movie critics refused to review the abundance of slasher films. After the infamous Friday the 13th review by Siskel and Ebert, they thought if they stopped reviewing these movies, it would starve the films from getting any coverage, and the studios would stop making them. In Siskel's review for Friday the 13th, he spoiled the ending by announcing the killer, thinking it would get people to not see the movie. In a huge jerk maneuver, he even gave out actress Betsy Palmer's address, instructing his readers to send her angry mail. In 1980, Siskel and Ebert did a special called Extreme Violence Directed at Women, where they showed their disgust for slasher films. They spoke about the disturbing trend in horror, about these films putting women in danger, completely missing the fact that the women are usually the survivors who defeat the killer, hence the final girl trope.
These films aren't in the same category. These films hate women. And unfortunately, the audiences that go to them don't seem to like women too much either.
I think that's a bad idea. You know, they outlawed bullfighting because it was cruel. I almost have some of the same feeling toward these kinds of films.
Bond and Fried didn't have the money to invest in a huge marketing campaign, so reviews, even bad ones, would have greatly increased the film's visibility.
We worried about whether additional publicity for these movies might simply help them out at the box office. We sure hope not.
When Graduation Day opened in New York, there were no reviews of it. While producing the film through investments by various theaters worked, Bond and Fried think it ended up hurting the film because it had to open regionally instead of nationally. If it opened at the same time at Graduation Day across the country, there's a pretty good chance it would have done a lot better. It did well enough that the theaters recouped their investments, and they said after cable, video, and TV deals, the movie made over $3 million. Fried sat in on one of the showings and was horrified. Every time a kill occurred, the audience laughed and cheered. He was stunned they would applaud the kills, and he swore he'd never make another horror film. He kept his word. He directed 6 more films, but never another horror film. Graduation Day is a very underappreciated slasher. While it does have its fans, it's nowhere near the level it should be. It's a uniquely constructed horror film done by a team not really into horror. I guess that's why the film has many oddities you won't find in other films of its type. While Anne ends up being the final girl, there really isn't a main character in the film. She shows up in the beginning and then disappears until much later in the film. The stopwatch gimmick was also a nice touch. The film worked out well for the band Felony. The film put them on the map, and some of their songs went on the charts. They later had songs on the soundtracks for Friday the 13th Part 6 and Valley Girl. Aaron Butler, the casting director, went on to write the women in prison film Chained Heat and the horror film Hellhole. After Graduation Day, Bond wanted to make what he called the most dangerous game in space. I'm kinda sad that never happened. A few years ago, Bond was approached with the possibility of making either a sequel or a remake to Graduation Day. Clint Howard co-wrote a script, but that also never came to fruition. Graduation Day is a great slasher film. It's got the right amount of scares, some unique kills, and a good balance of humor. Patch McKenzie makes for a strong lead, even though she's not in the film much. The editing really helps the film to stand out. While some might think it's annoying, I think it worked very well and used just enough. If the entire film was like this, I could see, but it's only used a couple of times. Graduation Day is a slasher film made by people who aren't horror fans and still somehow ended up making one of the most entertaining slashers of the 80s.
I told you I didn't want to speak to any more people. Now you tell the truth on your own time. Damn it!
Are you there, Mr. Guglione? It's Mrs. Brentwood, Paula's mother. She wants to talk to you, too.